here randomly, trying to see if all the systems are connecting. Doesn't look like it. There we go. Okay, cool. So, hi everyone. I am using a software streaming, so I'm going to be a little slow on reading your comments because I have a different platform open. But I'm very excited to jump on here on a random just to talk about the Independence Day. So, I'm very excited to be here and try this new software. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the US Independence Day as a solar return and also a progress chart. So I'm going to be talking about that. You'll see that my background has the chart. So I just use the solar return as the background. But the progress chart, I didn't. The software doesn't allow me to do multiple pictures. So I just used one. So in general, just to talk about the nation's chart, we are a nation that has a rising in Sagittarius, and we also have the sun. We have a stellium in the sign of Cancer. So we have the sun, we have Venus, Mercury, and one more planet there in Cancer. I forget which other planet is there. I think it's Jupiter. Yes, it's Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, and the Sun in the 8th house of Cancer. And our moon is in Aquarius. So this time around, we are actually being represented by a rising in Aquarius, which is where our natal moon is at as a country. So the moon natally is in the sign of Aquarius. So that means it is in the first house for this chart, meaning that matters of home, property, the people, the moon in country's chart represents the people and the people in the country. So we are going through a maturity stage because it is conjunct Saturn. Saturn is retrograde in this chart, and the ascendant is at 26 degrees Aquarius. And when we look at the moon and the first house and what they mean, they represent the general health of the people in the country as a whole. And also because it's in the sign of Aquarius, how we're innovating that. So the theme already innovation. Also, just looking at my notes here, Saturn in the first is going to be talking about matters in regard to government and architectural structures, buildings, also the aging nation and our sustainability, especially because it's in the sign of Aquarius, which is for us to think outside the box. Now, we are in need to restructure, and this is something that is in a signature throughout the entire chart. There's a lot of indicators of restructuring. Another one being the moon and Uranus conjunction. So this time around, we have the moon in the sign of Taurus, and it's next to Uranus. So it's already a separating aspect. But again, the moon in the solar return chart will talk about how the people are and how they're feeling, how they're represented. So it isn't falling in the 4th house of real estate, home, and then we have Uranus there, which is innovating. Now, in general, a Uranus and the moon on a natal chart will indicate a different type of upbringing in addition to nervousness to the body. With Uranus being there, just representing the nation, just not necessarily a person, the nation, and what's going to be happening for the next year, for the next when we get into the next solar return. Uranus there indicates that we're going to be moving moving around a lot, especially because it is close to the moon. On a different note, it can also indicate that the real estate market is going to dramatically change, and this could cause either an inflation, like bigger, or it could cause a huge drop. We do have Ceres wedging the moon between Uranus and um, so it's Uranus, the moon, and Ceres. So the moon's being wedged in between them. I was looking to see if it's activating the midpoint, and it looks like it is. It's very close to the midpoint. So that means that the moon is in the middle of both Uranus and Ceres, which it looks like it is. But Ceres talks about agriculture and seasons, and Uranus and Taurus. It was already predicted that it will cause a lot of climate issues throughout the world. When Uranus transits the sign of Taurus, it could also cause like earthquakes, fires. It's just very drastic weather. And it being so close to the moon, it's something that we're going to experience as a nation. It's also something that people in power are going to be talking about, because there's a trine from Pluto. Pluto's power, and it's trining the moon. So it's going to be a big theme in regard to climate change and things like that. And Ceres rules the seasons. So another indicator that that's going to hit home, because it's in the fourth house. And Ceres also rules abundance and agriculture. So it looks like innovating in regard to our food, because also the moon rules food. So Uranus being so close, there's going to be some new developments in regard to food. Not sure which way, if it's beneficial or not, because there's some squares from Uranus squaring Saturn, and then Uranus is also squaring Venus and Mars, which can be that the innovations are not like one of the greatest solutions, at least not for this year. So yeah, the sun is actually falling in the sixth house. So the sun in the sixth house talks about the head of state or the president, the people in main power, and it's falling in the sixth house. The sun is the one that talks about the president, but not necessarily the sixth house. It falling in the sixth house just means we're going to be focusing on work, the workforce. So naturally, this is the house of Virgo, and it rules health, it rules work, it rules employees, it rules labor. So this is something that we're focusing on now. Some of the positive aspects that this sun is making is that it's forming a sextile to Uranus. It's actually an exact sextile, a few minutes off. The sun is at 1319 and Uranus is at 1357. So it's an applying sextile. And it's also sextiling the moon. So this is a separating sextile at that point, and Ceres. So that means that we're going to be focusing on our homeland and restructuring our homeland, and restructuring the labor force, restructuring the medical system, restructuring. Hold on, I have some notes here. So for the moon, okay, I talked about agriculture, real estate. Okay. Yeah, labor. Okay, I think I read over all my notes that I had about that. So yeah, it's going to be talking about restructuring labor force in general. Now, the sun seems to have very good aspects. The only one is a square to Chiron, which is in the third, and that could be talking about healing from past trauma, which I think as a coming back from what happened last year, that's not something that we can like sweep aside. I'm sure that a lot of people are healing, and bringing it back to Ceres. Ceres is a asteroid that also talks about healing. So Ceres in general has a very rich mythology in regard to overcoming trauma. Her daughter was abducted by Pluto, and then she was returned after she wreaked havoc on Earth, which she's tied in with creating the seasons. So she made everything dry, and then she couldn't find her daughter yet, and she made everything cold. And then after, when she got her daughter back, she had everything be reborn through the spring season in the northern hemisphere. So her mythology is tied in with loss and grief and redemption. So she received redemption after. She is connected to abundance because having food is health and having food is wealth. So in regard to her standing, she has really good aspects, but that, you know, the squares that I see from Saturn just kind of emphasizing that there's going to be some pull from the people in general. Now, Jupiter is falling in the second house of resources. So this is the country's resources. It's actually conjunct a auspicious fixed star, Fomalhaut, which is Gabriel. But Jupiter is retrograde. Now we also have Neptune there, and we have Pallas Athena there. And when we have Neptune in the second house, it becomes a little tricky because we're not able to kind of think clearly. But in general, the pharmaceutical industry and the film industry, it rules actors, it rules mystics, it rules spiritual people. It is retro. Oh no, Jupiter is retrograde. And let me see. Sorry, I need to look closer. I don't think Neptune is also retrograde. Sorry. So it's Pallas that's not retro yet. It's Jupiter and Neptune that are retrograde in the chart itself. And Neptune also represents social status. So the social well-being, more like social services. It represents people that are homeless, people that have mental illnesses. It's associated with the 12th house, and we do have a planet in the 12th house, which is Pluto. But the 12th house is connected to systems that are disconnected from daily life, like prisons, like hospitals, asylums. So things that are kind of organized to disconnect certain people that can't really be in the workforce, like the sixth house energy. So Neptune's going to be emphasizing that these things be addressed. It's also ruling drugs, like pharmaceutical drugs and marijuana, rose marijuana, medical equipment, oil, gas. So things like that are going to be emphasized this time around. So we're probably going to see a lot of reform around that. And Jupiter just kind of expands everything. So I really think that spending and the way that the country itself has been spending is going to be a huge topic, and something that can be even borderline critical, like lots of crisis, because there is a square to the nodes from Jupiter. It's a separating square, but it's still there. So by house, it's squaring. So if these things are not addressed, we're going to see a lot of ups and downs with the economy because of the retrograde Jupiter, and also Jupiter kind of expanding and exploding, kind of exaggerating everything. So that's one of the things that I see. Now, Neptune is squaring Mercury. And in this chart, we have the North Node in the fifth house in the sign of Gemini. And Mercury is not necessarily close, but it's in the same house. But Mercury is making an applying square. So Neptune already has energy of not seeing things clearly, not seeing the whole picture, not it kind of confuses. Muse type of energy is foggy energy. It's tricky energy, and Neptune squaring Mercury becomes even trickier because now our mind and our sight, we're not ever able to see clearly. We're not able to think clearly because Neptune rules the mind and speech as well. And this is a third um, aspect that Neptune and Mercury make this year. So it's quite significant. Um, but the North Node is there. So in the fifth house, that's innovative. So, and it's also the house of entrepreneurs, children, education. Mercury also in the fifth would emphasize education. So, education and education reform would be something that is um, going to be worked on, like literally needs to be worked on. There's supporting trines from Mercury to Saturn, and also from the North Node to Saturn, which is the first house this time around. So this is an area where we can actually make money. We can generate money, and it's going to be also innovating sales systems. So we're going to see most likely something like when we saw the .com era, we're going to see a boost in that, which we're already seeing. So it's going to be more heightened and more emphasized now, more online selling and coursework and things like that, course creation, lots of retailing, things like that. That's what's going to get the economy going, but it needs to be restructured. Um, Neptune also rules with taxes, so it's in the second house. I didn't really look into that much, but just popped in there. So let me see if I covered everything I wanted to talk about. Neptune, yeah, helping the less advantaged, the homeless, hospitals, institutions, pharmaceutical, social services. Oh, okay. Also, regulation in regard to cost of medical equipment and prescription drugs. That's something that needs to be talked about. Um, so yeah, watch out for the companies that are investing in these Neptunian things because um, their value might go down or it could actually explode. It's gonna we don't when Jupiter is there, it just expands everything, but the energy of Neptune is quite unpredictable. Now there's a sextile to Pluto, which is power, control, so it can be positive, and then Neptune's also sextiling um, the moon, so it can be positive. However, we don't know how it's going to act because Neptune does flow up and down, up and down. And the moon also does the same thing. Now, Pluto is in Capricorn and it's in the 12th house. And Pluto in Capricorn, so the nation's placement of Pluto is at 27 degrees, and I forget the minutes, but we can say we're about to experience the Pluto return. We're like with an orb, but it's not necessarily until I think another 2 years. Um, so yeah, but when Pluto, when we have a Pluto return, that year is going to be quite significant. But everything that we're working on right now is leading us to that point, and that is transformation, that is rebirth. So a lot of systems are going to be changing, and we are like completely going to change the way that America runs. And that doesn't mean it's going to be for bad thing, it's actually needed. So there's a lot of old, outdated structures that needed to get revamped, and maybe some professions, become obsolete because of the innovation, but new professions are going to be reborn. So just attaining skills. Oh, Mercury rules skills too. So in the fifth house. So it's a good time to go back to school and attain a skill. And that's not necessarily long term schooling, but more like apprenticeship work and certificated work, because Mercury rules that. So something quick that's going to bring money. Now, the ruler of the 10th house, or the MC in this chart, is Jupiter. And the MC is in Sagittarius conjunct Juno. So matters of partnerships, relationships, marriages, they're in the forefront this year. And we see the South Node there very close. So it can be that we see a higher rate of divorce. Unfortunately, I hate to talk about that, but um, the South Node tends to let go of things. So that could be one of the indicators where we see a lot of more divorce in the nation. Now, the MC at 11 degrees and the DC over here at, so the DC is in Gemini at 11 degrees as well. Um, hmm, I didn't notice this until now, but the nation has Sag rising, and the MC is very close to the Sag rising, in addition to having a descendant in Gemini, and that's also close to the DC here, close to the North Node. So the first and seventh house are being emphasized, and in this house, they're represented as the fifth and the 11th house, which is the fifth is the house of Leo, the king, and the 11th house is the house of the people in the kingdom. So networks, it rules the stock market. Co-rules it with the fifth house, because the fifth house is the house of speculation. Um, but the 11th is the house of long-term investments. So Jupiter being retrograde, and actually the ruler of the 11th and the 7th and the second actually is pretty good, because it does bring in a supportive aspect. Now it is a square, but in regard to paying, like we're gonna have to do some work, so it'll pay off. Energy of the square is in relation to Mars. So Mars means action. Mars means taking action. So we are going to have to take action and do some work, some legwork. But the MC falling in the 11th house is going to be assisting the people. Now, the South Node in the 11th house talks about changing from what we're at now. So a lot of change and heading to the fifth house, which is coming back to our creative center. That's what the fifth is, are the things we love to do. Now, the last planets that I did not mention were Venus and Mars. And Venus and Mars are in the seventh house. Now, the seventh house is the house of collaboration and partnerships. So it looks like, in regard to the nation's welfare, because Venus is ruling the moon and Uranus, lots of collaborating, lots of innovating too, and pioneering new frontiers, because Mars is there, is being called to do as a nation. Now, there is going to be some pushback and struggle because of all the squares. So, unfortunately, this not grand cross, it's actually a T square. This T square that Uranus and Saturn and Mars formed is going to be active for the nation for the entire year, because we have Saturn at 12 degrees, we have Uranus at 13, and we have Mars at 14. So they're very close. So it's going to carry that signature. It is separating. But for the rest of the year, we're going to feel this push and pull. Now, the house to focus on is going to be the Scorpio house. And that's again, talking about power and money, large amounts of money, wealth. It also talks about esoteric things. Oh, and that's something I forgot to mention. So the moon represents the people in the nation, and Uranus also rules astrology. It rules um, thinking outside the box, thinking eccentrically. So looks like people are going to be a little bit more open minded when it comes down to that stuff. Now, there's some people that are going to really be resistant because there is that square to Saturn, but we're going to have a lot more people just kind of embrace new methods of uh, calming the body, calming the mind, calming the self. Um, Moon rules the mind, but this is not necessarily like the Mercury mind, which is speech. This is more like a different type of intelligence, like how you retain thoughts, things like that. So I was excited about that, to see that as an astrologer. I always like to see when astrology is supported in the chart. But going back to the Scorpio house rules trauma, transformation, the occult, in addition to the nation already having a lot of planets in the eighth house. We were founded on esotericism. I mean, if you look at the dollar, we have the Aussie and I, right? So um, we're going to find some direction towards that house. And because Mars rules it, which is Mars is ruling in this chart the third house and the 10th house. So, yeah, talking about commerce, Mars is going to be ruling our commerce, and it's next to Venus. So, sports cars, engineers, um, iron workers, um, construction workers, because of Saturn and Mars together, and also designers because Venus. So, again, restructuring the nation. It looks like we're going to also be restructuring um, our country itself, but landmarks like cities and old structures and old buildings that needed to be restructured. And most likely that's where we're going to bring in the innovated real estate, maybe even having more um, houses rebuilt, but to support like maybe communes, things like that. So there is going to be some pushback. Most likely, the pushback's going to be coming from the money, like the debt that the country is in. But yeah, overall, I really see this chart as something that um, all the planets underneath the surface, other than Mars and Venus and Pluto. Pluto's like in the 12th house, though, so that's still a hidden house. But it's all about retreating. We're going to be retreating this year still, and we're going to be working on the country itself because the moon is in the fourth house. So, working on the economy of the country, the people in the country, the young people too, because Mercury in the fifth, and collaborating in regard to things that Venus rules, which is fashion, design, the arts, and Mars. I covered that already. And then Venus and Mars are also going to be completing a new cycle. So that's quite romantic. We might also see a lot more um, like venues and things like that open with Venus in the seventh. Maybe more push towards having like concerts and things like that. But again, there's going to be pushback. Neptune in the second, also when I was looking at this chart, and I didn't know if I wanted to talk about this or not, but because we can't see clearly, and the second house is also the house of self-worth and how we take care of ourselves, Neptune being there. um, I just kind of want to warn people to be extra careful, not to leave common sense behind. Because of Neptune squaring Mercury, we might forget common sense practices, and then we'll suffer some consequences. Mercury rules the lungs, Neptune rules infections, so be careful. And what is the last thing I wanted to mention about this chart? Ooh, that's the last thing I wanted to mention. So, shortly after the solar return, we are also having a new moon in Cancer. So, that's also supporting a new labor force. So, we're definitely not going back to our old way. Like, we completely restructured, and we're going to continue to restructure. So there's new beginnings in regard to the country, the homeland. It's happening in the 6th house in this chart, but in the natal chart, it's happening in the 8th house. So it's transformation. So it's rebirthing our economic system, it's rebirthing our nation. And I think it's at 19 degrees, and I'm not sure we have a planet at 19th degree. I didn't check for that. Now, when we look at the progress chart, we're being represented by an ascendant in Virgo, which again, natural ruler of the 6th house. The moon in this chart is in Aquarius, and it's very close to the transiting Saturn right now. And we also have Mercury in Aquarius. And the sun is in Pisces next to Pallas Athena, and it's in the 7th house. So one thing that stood up, and I wish I could show you this chart, but it doesn't allow me to show multiple pictures. But in this chart, Uranus is conjunct the MC, which is the highest point of the chart. That's the career point, and it talks about the government and the nation. So Uranus conjunct the MC. There is first emphasizing different way of thinking, but again, innovation, just innovation, innovation, innovation. And in this chart, we have Mars in the 2nd house, which can also indicate that we are overspending, because Mars in the 2nd house likes to burn through money. And nothing emphasized in the 4th, but the 4th house is Sagittarius house, and that's where we have the MC for the solar return. So we combine both of those. Again, the direction of the country, working on the home. And let me see what else I see here. Venus is at 2nd degree in Taurus in the 9th house. Foreign policies, things like that. Yeah, let's see if I have some comments. I don't know if this is supporting comments or not. I don't see any. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Just wanted to wish everyone happy 4th, and everyone stay safe. We still have that T-square with all the planets, so it's time for us to be cautious. Okay. Thank you. Bye.